My name's Mike. I'm 55, and I've been married to Sarah for 30 years. Our kids are all grown up now, living their own lives, and we were supposed to be entering this golden chapter of our lives. Empty nesters, you know? We were supposed to travel, relax, spend time together, and maybe even rediscover some of the magic that started our marriage in the first place. To be honest, I never thought anything would disrupt the routine we had. Sure, there were small things like her being on her phone a little too much or spending more time out with her friends, but nothing too alarming. I thought it was just her getting her own life back after years of focusing on the kids. I never suspected a thing until it hit me like a freight train. The first real sign came when Sarah started coming home late on weekends, usually after girls' nights out. She'd tell me she was out with some of her old college friends, and they were just catching up. She was always so vague about the details, which was weird because we'd always been so open with each other. I was never the jealous type, but it started to nag at me, that gut feeling you get when something's not right. But I shrugged it off. After all, we were in our 50s. Life was supposed to be boring and predictable now, right? One evening, after Sarah had been particularly distant, I decided to do something I rarely ever did. I snooped. I know, it's not something I'm proud of, but I had this uneasy feeling creeping up, and I couldn't ignore it anymore. I was sitting in the living room watching TV when she went upstairs to take a shower. I had never been the type to go through her things, but that night, something felt off. I walked into her office, where she always kept her phone plugged in. Normally, I wouldn't have bothered, but that day, I noticed a text message preview on the screen. It was from someone named Tom, with a heart emoji at the end. Now, we've been married for 30 years, so I know all the contacts in her phone. Tom wasn't anyone I recognized. My heart started to race. I opened the message, trying to keep my breathing steady. It was innocent enough at first, just small talk about how her day had been. But then there were lines like, "Can't wait to see you tonight," and "You make me feel alive again." My stomach dropped. I froze there for a second, the phone in my hand, feeling like the ground beneath me had just shifted. This wasn't just a friendly text. This was something else, something deeper, something that didn't belong in a marriage. I quickly backed away and left the office, my mind racing. I couldn't just confront her about this without being sure. So I decided to wait to gather more evidence. But deep down, I already knew. I just couldn't bring myself to believe it. I spent the next few days trying to play it cool, but every time Sarah walked into the room, I couldn't help but feel that sickening knot in my stomach. I'd never felt this way before. Not with her. She was my partner, my best friend. But now, every smile she gave me felt like a lie. Every word she spoke seemed like part of some well-crafted story she'd been telling me for years. It wasn't until the following Friday night, a week after I found those texts, that I had the perfect opportunity to confront her. She'd gone out with the girls again. She always made sure to mention it, like it was some badge of honor. But this time, I had something different planned. I didn't want to blow up right away. I wanted her to feel the tension, to know that I knew. So, when she came home late, a little tipsy, I acted normal. I greeted her with a smile, asked about her night, and gave her the space to tell her usual story. But there was a catch. This time, I wasn't just listening to her words. I was watching her every move. She was standing by the kitchen counter, taking off her jacket, when I casually asked, "So, how was your date with Tom tonight?" I watched her face freeze, the blood draining from it as if I'd hit her with a sledgehammer. She dropped her jacket on the counter and turned to face me, her eyes darting around like she was trying to process the fact that I knew. I didn't say anything else. I just waited, letting the silence linger between us, giving her room to lie. Finally, she stammered out, "What are you talking about? Tom? Who's Tom? You must be confused. It's just a name in my phone." "There's nothing." I cut her off, feeling a rage boil up inside me. "Don't lie to me, Sarah. I saw the messages. I know what's been going on. It's been happening for months, hasn't it?" For a second, I thought she might break down, confess everything. But instead, she narrowed her eyes at me and snapped, "You're crazy, Mike. You've always been paranoid. It's not what you think. God, you don't understand. It's nothing, just nothing." Couldn't believe it. This wasn't the woman I married. This wasn't the woman who once promised to love me forever, to always be faithful. She was standing there, right in front of me, trying to make me believe that I was the crazy one. I pressed harder, pushing her to come clean, but she stuck to her story. She said it was nothing, that I was just imagining things, even though the evidence was right in front of her. The worst part? She wasn't even sorry. She wasn't regretful. It was as if she was playing a game, trying to manipulate me into questioning everything I'd seen. And that's when it hit me. She wasn't going to confess. She wasn't going to apologize. She was too deep in her lies to care about what this was doing to me. So I made a decision right then and there. I was done being the fool. I wasn't going to beg for the truth anymore. If she wasn't going to come clean, I'd make her. The next few days felt like I was living in a fog. Couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I could hear her words echoing in my head. You're crazy. It's nothing. But that didn't make sense. I wasn't crazy, I had the proof. The texts, the late nights, the excuses. The betrayal was as clear as day. But somehow, she was still able to twist it into something that made me question everything. I went through a range of emotions in those few days. First, it was disbelief. Then anger. I couldn't stop thinking about all the years we had spent together. The family we built. The dreams we shared. How could she betray me like this? But what hit the hardest was the loneliness. I felt completely isolated in my own home. The woman I had trusted for decades had turned into someone I didn't even recognize. She was no longer the woman I had shared everything with. She had become a stranger, a liar. The emotional impact was suffocating. I didn't know who I was anymore. I didn't know how to feel. I was angry, but I was also heartbroken. I couldn't stop thinking about the times we had been so close, laughing together, enjoying life. I wanted to hate her for what she'd done, but I couldn't help but feel sad. Sad that everything we built could fall apart over something like this. But there was a part of me that felt a flicker of resolve. If she thought she could get away with this, she was wrong. I couldn't let her just walk away from this, not without facing the consequences. The thought of letting her get away with it, of letting her live in that delusion, made my blood boil. She wasn't going to get off easy. I spent the next few days making plans. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do yet, but I knew one thing. I was done being the victim in my own life. She had taken control of the narrative, but now it was my turn to write the story. I knew I couldn't just jump into revenge without thinking it through. I wasn't looking for something petty or destructive, but I wanted her to feel the weight of what she had done. She couldn't just act like it didn't matter. I wasn't going to let her get away with making me feel like I was the problem in our marriage. She had crossed a line, and I was going to make sure she knew the consequences of her actions. So I started thinking, what could I do that would really get to her without making me seem like a bitter, crazy man? I wanted to hurt her, yes, but I also wanted to make sure she would never forget what she had done. The first thing I did was take a deep dive into her life. I started noticing things she thought I hadn't. The little signs of her new routine, who she was talking to on the phone, where she was really going when she said she was out with the girls. I wasn't just watching her anymore. I was investigating. I hired a private investigator, not because I needed more proof, but because I needed to know the extent of the affair. I wanted to know if this was just a fling or if she was planning something bigger. I didn't want to go into this blindly. I needed to have all the pieces, the whole puzzle, so I could make sure she would have no leg to stand on when it came time to confront her again. As the investigator got back to me with the information, I was shocked. There was more to this than I could have ever imagined. Sarah wasn't just seeing Tom. There were others. She had been seeing multiple men over the past year. Each one was a different story, a different lie. She had built an entire web of deception, and I was the one sitting in the middle of it, believing she was still the woman I had married. Now I had the full picture. It wasn't just Tom. It was betrayal on a scale I couldn't even wrap my head around. And yet, there she was, still acting like everything was fine, still playing her little game. But no more. I was ready. I knew exactly what I was going to do. This wasn't going to be some petty revenge. This was going to be the kind of reckoning she'd never forget. I wasn't just going to expose her to herself. I was going to expose her to everyone around her. The plan was set in motion. She had no idea what was coming. It was time. I had all the pieces in place, and I wasn't going to let Sarah continue living her lie. She needed to understand that actions have consequences, especially when they involve tearing apart the life you built with someone. I wasn't going to just confront her and walk away. No, I was going to make sure that everyone who mattered knew the truth. I started by contacting a few of her closest friends, people I'd known for years but hadn't spoken to much recently. I wasn't looking for sympathy. I wanted them to know the truth. I wasn't about to let Sarah sit there, acting like the perfect wife, while she was out there sleeping with other men. So, I told them everything. I shared the details, the names, the dates, the text messages, the lies. And to my surprise, most of them weren't shocked. Some had their suspicions, but they hadn't said anything. It felt good, honestly, to not be the only one carrying the weight of her betrayal. It was like a weight had lifted off my shoulders. Like I wasn't alone in this anymore. And I knew it would get back to Sarah. She was going to hear about it soon enough. But I wasn't done. Oh no, this was just the beginning. The next part of my plan was even more personal. I knew Sarah's biggest fear wasn't the affair itself. It was the possibility of losing everything. Losing her perfect image, losing her social circle, losing the life she had worked so hard to create. So, I made sure that the people who mattered most to her knew everything. I didn't just tell her friends, I made sure to tell our children. It was a Saturday when I decided to sit them down. All 3 of our kids were in town for the weekend, and I knew this was the moment. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest as I told them what had been going on. I explained how I had found out how the affair wasn't just with Tom. It was multiple people. The betrayal was bigger than anything I could have imagined. They were in shock. My daughter started crying, and my son, who never showed much emotion, looked at me like he couldn't believe what he was hearing. My youngest, who had always been close to Sarah, seemed lost, like he didn't know which way was up anymore. They asked why I didn't just talk to Mom about it, why I had to go to such extremes. But I couldn't explain it all in one sitting. I wasn't just punishing her. I was giving them a glimpse into the truth, so they wouldn't be fooled by her lies either. When I saw their faces, I knew I was doing the right thing. They needed to know the kind of woman their mother really was. They needed to see the truth, no matter how painful it was. I sat back, exhausted from the weight of everything I had just revealed. But I knew one thing for sure. Sarah's world was about to come crashing down. The next morning, Sarah came home from another one of her late-night girls' nights, completely unaware of what was waiting for her. I could already tell she was in a good mood, her usual cheery self, until she walked through the door. I was sitting in the living room, waiting for her, and when she stepped inside, I barely gave her a chance to get her shoes off before I hit her with it. "How was last night, Sarah? Did you and Tom have fun?" She froze in the doorway. Her smile dropped instantly, replaced by that same look I had seen so many times in our conversations over the past week. She was trying to process everything. And then it happened. The mask slipped. She knew I wasn't asking for some casual conversation anymore. I wasn't playing dumb. I wasn't asking her how the night went. I was confronting her. I was done letting her control the narrative. "You told them, didn't you?" She snapped, her voice cold, shaking with a mix of anger and fear. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I let her stew in that moment. She looked at me like I was some kind of monster. The realization hit her like a ton of bricks. I had exposed her. The people she had spent years manipulating and deceiving were now looking at her with the same disgust and disappointment I felt. Her eyes darted to the phone in my hand, the one I had been using to call our kids the night before. I could see her face turn pale as the full weight of what I had done sank in. I wasn't done yet, though. "I told them everything, Sarah. Our kids, your friends, everyone who matters. They deserve to know who you really are." I let the words hang in the air. She opened her mouth to speak, but nothing came out at first. I could see the cogs turning in her head as she tried to formulate her response. For a moment, she was speechless. Finally, she found her voice, but it was shaky. You had no right. You've ruined everything. I told you it was nothing. It's not what you think. I never wanted it to go this far, Mike. But But what, Sarah? You never wanted it to go this far? You think I'm going to buy that after everything you've done? After all the lies, the late nights, the secrets? You think you can just say that and I'll forgive you? You think you can still twist this into something that's my fault? Her face flushed with anger, but beneath it, I could see the fear. She had lost control, and it was too late for her to take anything back. She had already tried to justify it, to minimize what she had done. But now the truth was out there. The damage was done. I don't know how to fix this, she whispered, her voice barely audible. No, you don't, I said, my own voice tight with rage. But you'll have to live with the consequences. And so will I. But at least I have the satisfaction of knowing I'm not the one living a lie anymore. I'm not the one pretending everything's fine when it's not. She started pacing, muttering to herself. I could see the frustration building in her, the way she was struggling to come to terms with everything that was falling apart around her. But the reality was simple. She had betrayed me. She had betrayed our family. And now she had to face the consequences. I stood up, meeting her gaze. I don't need your apologies. You've already done enough damage. I'm done being the fool. You should leave. Right now. She didn't say anything, but the look in her eyes said it all. I wasn't sure if she was angry, regretful, or just trying to figure out where to go from here. But I didn't care. I had made my peace with it. And that's when she finally spoke, almost in a whisper. I never thought you'd do this, Mike. I never thought you'd hurt me like this. I looked at her coldly, emotionless. I didn't hurt you. You hurt me. And now you have to face it. She turned and walked out the door, her footsteps heavy with the weight of what had just happened. I stood there for a long time after she left, just letting the silence fill the space between us. It was over. I had no idea where she was going, or what she would do next. But I knew one thing. I had taken back control of my life. And for the first time in weeks, I could breathe again. The house felt different after she left. Quieter. Empty. I don't know what I expected, but when Sarah walked out, it hit me harder than I thought it would. Even though I had taken back control, even though I had exposed the truth, there was still that lingering ache, that sense of loss. I spent the next few days pacing around the house, cleaning things I'd never bothered to clean before, organizing, trying to focus on anything other than the hole Sarah left behind. The worst part was when I'd sit down to dinner, expecting to hear her voice from the other room, asking how my day went or what I wanted to watch on TV. But there was nothing. I didn't know if she was staying at a friend's place or moving in with Tom. She never came back to grab her things. I wasn't about to chase her down and ask. If she wanted to leave, she could leave. It wasn't my job to beg her to come back. Then, something unexpected happened. After a few days, Sarah reached out. Not to apologize, not really, but to explain herself. I couldn't believe it when I saw her name pop up on my phone. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to let her stew in whatever guilt she might have been feeling, but another part of me was curious. What could she possibly have left to say? I answered, I thought you might want to hear me out, Mike. I've been thinking. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe I shouldn't have lied. But you don't understand. It wasn't just about the men. It was about me too. I was losing myself. I felt like I was fading into the background, like you didn't even see me anymore. Her words were full of excuses, but I could hear the desperation in her voice. I knew she wasn't sorry for what she had done to me. She was sorry for getting caught. She was sorry for losing everything that she had taken for granted. And I realized then that this wasn't about me. It wasn't about us. It was about her. She was too selfish to understand that what she had done hurt me, hurt our family. She had been so wrapped up in her own problems, in her own search for validation, that she never stopped to think about the damage she was causing. I didn't know what to say. I wasn't interested in her explanations or her reasons. It was too late for that. I'm done with this, Sarah. I told her, my voice firm. You've made your choices, and so have I. We're not going to fix this. It's over. And that was it. The conversation ended with her on the other side of the phone, quiet for a long time, before she hung up. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vindicated. I just felt done. Completely done. For the first time in weeks, I sat down on the couch, turned off my phone, and just stared at the walls. The weight of everything that had happened began to settle in. I had survived the storm, but I wasn't sure where I was going from here. My life had been turned upside down. I wasn't sure what the future held, but I knew one thing for sure. I was never going to let someone else take away my peace again. The betrayal had crushed me, but it had also shown me what I was capable of. I could stand up for myself. I could make hard decisions. I could heal even if it took time. And as I sat there, I felt the first real sense of peace in weeks. It wasn't over. I still had a long road ahead, but at least I wasn't living a lie anymore. In the weeks that followed, I tried to find a new rhythm in life, one without Sarah in it. The house felt quieter, but it also felt more mine. I started doing things I hadn't done in years, things I had always put off because I was too busy or too distracted. I finally picked up the guitar again, something I used to love before life and marriage took over. I even took a trip to the lake, a place Sarah and I used to visit when we first started dating. It was strange, being there without her. I remembered how we would sit by the water for hours, just talking about everything and nothing. But sitting there by myself, I realized something. The pain of losing her wasn't as sharp anymore. It was still there, sure. The wound was still fresh, but it wasn't consuming me like it once had. I started to focus more on myself, on rediscovering the things I loved. I signed up for yoga, something I'd always wanted to try, but she'd always been too critical about. It felt good to take care of myself in ways I had neglected for so long. The more I took care of myself, the more I realized how much I had let myself slip away over the years. I didn't tell anyone about the things I was doing. I didn't need their validation. For the first time in a long while, I was living for me. One of the hardest parts was dealing with the kids. They were confused, hurt, angry, and I didn't blame them. They had grown up seeing us as this perfect couple, the model family, and suddenly that image was shattered. I tried to reassure them that it wasn't their fault, that nothing about this was their doing. But it was hard. We had a couple of family meetings where we all talked openly about what happened. They wanted to know if I'd ever consider trying to fix things with Sarah. I didn't have an answer for them. I wasn't sure. The idea of reconciling was tempting at first, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized that trust had been irreparably broken. It wasn't just the affair. It was the years of lies, the emotional distance, the times I felt like I was living with a stranger. I couldn't go back to that, no matter how much I loved the person she used to be. As time went on, I began to heal. Slowly. It wasn't easy, and there were days when I found myself lying awake at night, thinking about everything that had happened. But the weight of the betrayal didn't drag me down anymore. I started to feel lighter, more free. Sarah never reached out again. I heard through the grapevine that she was trying to move on with her life, maybe even seeing someone else, but I didn't care. I didn't need to know. I had my own life to rebuild. I realized something important during this time. When you go through something like this, you have two choices. You can let the hurt consume you, or you can let it teach you how strong you really are. I chose to heal, and that's when I started to truly forgive myself. I stopped blaming myself for not seeing the signs earlier, for trusting her when I should have been more aware. I wasn't perfect, but I had done my best. And sometimes that's all you can do. I wasn't bitter. I wasn't angry anymore. I was just moving on. And with each step, I found a new version of myself that I hadn't known was there. A version that was stronger, wiser, and more resilient than I had ever imagined. I was no longer defined by Sarah's betrayal. I was defined by the person I was becoming. And as I walked away from that chapter of my life, I felt a sense of hope I hadn't felt in a long time. I didn't need Sarah to be happy. I was learning to be happy on my own. Looking back, I don't know if I would have ever found the strength to leave if I hadn't been forced into this situation. I never thought I'd be the guy who got cheated on, but life has a funny way of surprising you, doesn't it? If there's one thing I've learned from all of this, it's that your happiness is in your own hands. No one can take that from you unless you let them. Sarah took something from me, but she didn't take my ability to move forward. That's something no one can ever steal. To anyone who's reading this and going through something similar, my advice is simple. Don't let the pain define you. Let it teach you. Let it show you how strong you are. And don't wait for someone else to fix your life. You can do it. You're stronger than you think. As for Sarah, I hope she finds what she's looking for. But me, I'm finding peace again. And that's all I need. Thank you for staying with me. This crazy journey is finally over and I'm ready for what's next. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any more interesting stories. And leave a comment with what you would do in this situation. See you in the next videos.